Non-fungible tokens are unique digital collectibles that are represented on a blockchain in the form of a token. They make it possible to own digital media assets in the same way that you can own a digital currency like Bitcoin. Hey, this is Sri.
And this is Will.
Welcome to the Technium, where we talk about the edge of technology and what we can build with it. An optimistic look at the road ahead. How's it going, Will?
Hello, how's it going? How was your week?
Yeah, pretty good. I think I was energized because I was, looking forward to this week and this new episode, as well as my all new drink. I went to Whole Foods at the beginning of the week and I did a big shopping spree and I got a bunch of new stuff and I'm excited to share with you this thing. It is a herb craft rose botanical drink. It promises that it's going to calm and relax me, which I'm gonna need because I'm like really hyped up for this week. What are you drinking?
Really? Drinking more kombucha, but this is the Holiday Cheer Health Aid kombucha. I don't know. I don't know what flavor this is. I thought it would be like peppermint, but it's not. It just tastes like sugar bubbles. So I don't know.
It's not pumpkin spice?
No. But when I look at like 13 grams of added sugar, it's like 26% of your daily allowance.
That's so health aid.
That actually.
Right. Nice. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think I'm really excited for this week's topic because
what are we talking about this week for the new week, new year?
Yeah, it is the new year. This is our first recording of the new year. So this week we are talking about NFTs.
NFTs.
Yes, non-fungible tokens. They are non-fungible, but they're very fun. Non-fungible tokens are unique digital collectibles that are represented on a blockchain in the form of a token. They make it possible to own digital media assets in the same way that you can own a digital currency like Bitcoin. And so these NFTs have been on the news a lot in the past year or so. Most commonly, they're associated with ownership of digital artwork. Things like CryptoPunks, as well as a few other projects, have made big splashes even in the mainstream media outside of the tech news for having really high selling prices. And traditional art names like Sotheby's have gotten involved and have started running auctions for NFTs as well. And so NFTs have sort of currently pigeonholed themselves into this idea of representing crypto art. But I think that NFTs are actually a building block for many other interesting applications. And that's what I'm excited to talk about this week.
Yeah, this week is about NFTs. And I guess as a preface to the episode, we're mostly going to be talking about NFTs and their potential and the applications outside of art. Because in typical news that, people get worked up about, it's going to be about art and this and that, or about the objections to NFTs. Like, we're not going to cover any of that. We're going to assume that our listeners already know what NFTs are, and they think that, okay, like, this is interesting, but what else can we really do with this? And so that's what we're going to be exploring here today.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we're still really early in the life cycle of NFTs and of what people are building with it. So right now, I think that a bunch of the energy is still on crypto art, as well as other forms of art besides visual art. So, audio NFTs and songs and things like this. But there are a few glimmers here and there of people using NFTs for things beyond artwork. And I think that we're going to see more of that as we go along. And it's going to take a while for people to kind of bash their heads at this tool and then see what they can make with it. But, I think as we do on this podcast, we can go through a few of these projects that we see that are promising, as well as sort of extrapolate from there where things are going to go.
Yeah, and that's not to say like the art part isn't important. I mean, when people say art, a lot of people think of stuff that are in museums, but actually the art in museums today were the memes of yesteryear, right? And unless you knew the art history, like sometimes the paintings were like call outs and, callbacks with like what their painter friends were painting. So they decided to do like a little satire on it or like a reference or a shout out.
Right.
And memes are the same way today. And so what people are doing with the memes today, like it's most of it is digital, like all memes are digital actually to to my understanding. Like nobody's hanging up pictures of like what's a meme, like the girl with the house on fire or something like that in a museum. Maybe not today, but tomorrow, right? And like NFTs are a way to make these digital pieces of culture ownable to the extent that people recognize it as such. So so that's not to say that it's not important, but definitely there's going to be a lot of stuff in that area, but there's all this universe of things outside of it as well that I think people are not focused on at the moment, but they will. I think like we can see that this has a lot of possibility.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I think, NFTs at their core, if you kind of, forget about the current application and hype around on art assets, NFTs in general are a type of asset that is programmable. And so you can own it. It can do things in reaction to the events that happen to it, or
on chain though.
On chain
things that happen to it on chain.
Yes. So I think that enables a lot of interesting applications. And so I think, how about we sort of dive into a few and then see what each of those applications tell us about the power of NFTs and then what it could mean for what we're going to build ahead.
Sounds good. And so I guess one of the first things that caught my eye outside of crypto art for NFTs is the ENS and ENS domains. So ENS stands for an Ethereum name service, and it's akin to DNS for the internet, which is the domain name service. And so as we all know, the domain name service lets you type www.google.com instead of the IP address for Google when you want to access the services. And right now, for wallet addresses, it's a long string of hexadecimals. And you can easily make a mistake when entering these wallet addresses to send money to and fro. And it induces a lot of anxiety for users of crypto. Even Vitalik like sends a little bit of money just to test that it got through before he moves all his money over, right? And so what ENS does is that it gives a human readable name to every wallet address out there. And so this could be wallet addresses owned by people or their wallet addresses for contracts. And so if I wanted to send you, Shri, like some ETH, I wouldn't have to memorize your wallet address like 3BE7 or whatever, or keep an address book. I could just remember that you registered Shri.eth, and that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you see, a lot of crypto people on Twitter, a lot of them have at this point just changed their Twitter display names to like whatever.eth. And so I think like it's sort of becoming beyond just a domain name. It's also just becoming a kind of a handle or identity that is kind of being used throughout this like Web3 ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a little strange because everything is inspectable on Ethereum. It's literally where people are posting their bank account numbers.
Yes. Right. Yeah, that's true. Because you can look at like the ENS domain, and I can see like all of the things all the transactions you've made and all the kind of
right. Yeah. But I think most people like they have like a active wallet that they put a little bit of money to. It's kind of like your wallet in your pocket. You put a lot of money to do a little bit of stuff, and then your cold wallets and stuff are somewhere else. Yeah, so people do use them as identifiers, and then there are other people that just write .eth without actually owning the dot. Um,
Just to show that they're cool and part of the ETH world.
maybe they just missed the memo, but the idea is just that it's an easy way to reference somebody. It's effectively an identity. And the thing is, an ENS domain doesn't just have to point to a wallet address. It's a bona fide name system where you can set the canonical URLs for your Twitter account, a Discord. Like, you can associate a .com domain with your ETH domain. Like, you can do a lookup and that it'll come back to you and tell you what that is. For IPFS, for email, anything that you have a text reference, like a resource URI that you can write in as text, you can write as an ENS record. And so effectively what this does is it sets a canonical place for an identity across all different networks, actually, right? So like for any one entity, whether it's a company or an individual, you would have one place to look where, like, what is the official Twitter, email, Discord, so on and so forth for this particular entity.
Interesting. So the reason we were talking about this is that an ENS domain is represented as an NFT. Is that right?
Oh, yes. That's the why we're doing the entire episode.
Yeah.
So yeah, the ENS domain itself is actually an NFT. And so one of the things that people have as an objection, which we said we would talk about, but this lines up with the ENS, is that when people talk about, oh, like, why have a blockchain for an NFT? Like, you can just cryptographically sign it and give it to people. And then other people retort with, well, how do you solve the double spend problem? And then somebody else comes back with, well, you could just make two contracts with the same thing. And then so usually what happens today is that the project creator has on their website a canonical contract address. And so if you trust that they still have control of their DNS domain, then that contract address is correct. But with ENS coming online, I mean, it's already working actually.
Yeah.
But it's just not in as widespread of use. Like, you could just go to that creator's .eth address and check out like what the contract address for their NFT is. And that would be the canonical one.
Yeah, interesting. So ENS kind of gives a kind of publicly accessible directory or lookup system for a lot of things. When we think about domains right now, we're basically thinking about what is the lookup system to associate a human readable name with a web resource, most likely a HTTP, website, or like on the World Wide Web. But you can extend this with Web3 because you have many other types of objects and assets. And so ENS is interesting because it provides a lookup system to kind of associate a human readable name with any kind of object that you might want to interact with.
Yeah. And so like, why have ENS domains at all? Like, why not like just use DNS for this? And I think one thing that having NFTs buys you is that because there's a standard for them, you can automatically trade them on any of the standard NFT marketplaces for the domain names. So that's one. And two, which we'll get to later, is that you can compose these NFTs into different things together, so you can package them together. So it inherits all the properties of other NFTs along with what it does specifically as a domain name.
Yeah, and I think that the interoperability of all of these building blocks being built on Ethereum or on any other blockchain is important, because you can imagine that right now a domain is controlled by a corporation. So Google, the corporation, owns google.com, and somewhere, somehow, within the structure of Google, somebody is tasked with, maintaining the mapping of google.com and its DNS entries to all of its servers. Going forward, if we imagine that the future of organizations is going to be DAOs, well, it makes a lot of sense that a DAO controls an NFT, which represents a .eth address, and that DAO can have votes or can have members who are delegated to maintaining the ENS registry and keeping that up to date and maintaining that source of truth. And so it's nice that ENS is built on the blockchain, because it means that you can compose it with these other, big ideas on the blockchain, like DAOs and things like that.
Right. And not only that, the ENS, you can create, as the owner of an ENS address, you can create subdomains for the ENS. So if there is a DAO called Technium.eth, like we can create a will.technium.eth and a Shri.technium as I guess officers or like elected officials or whatever it is for working at the DAO.
Mm-hmm.
Come to think of it, maybe we should register.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it available? We might be late to the game, but yeah, let's see.
Yeah, I don't know. We might be late to the game.
Yeah.
Maybe, but like all this talk, we should probably register that. But it's like by the time you guys get this,
we'll have registered it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And there's a subdomain aspect as well. As in my brief view of the documentation, you can associate all types of other metadata with an ENS domain. And so you can have it point to other kinds of properties. Basically, there's a key value store that underlies some of this, so you can associate it with all kinds of other things that I think people will come up with. So it's a cool aspect. I mean, I think ENS has nothing to do with art. I think the thing that's interesting about NFTs is that an NFT, it only by happenstance happens to be associated with images by the fact that an NFT can have metadata associated with it, and that metadata can point to some other type of resource. So in the common case, it points to an image URL, but in the case of these other types of NFTs that we're talking about, it can actually contain pointers or actually contain the data itself for all kinds of other assets. It's not just that, the idea of imagery is baked into the idea of an NFT.
Yeah, I think one of the things about ENS that is interesting is all the data that makes up the NFT is sitting on chain. And so it's self-contained. Whereas a lot of the art stuff, it raises skepticism because the images sometimes are off chain. And so there's a variety of different workarounds for that. And there are art NFTs whose art is entirely stored on chain as SVGs. And so that's just an aside. But I think one of the things that gives it power as something that you can wholly own for ENS is that it's entirely on chain. All the data that you need in order for it to go away, the entire Ethereum blockchain would need to go away, and that's a high bar.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think ENS is pretty interesting, and the nice thing is that it's kind of abstract in that I think that our current view of NFTs is very tied to tangible things that we know, right? So people are talking about art NFTs, and then people are like, well, 2022 is going to be the year of audio NFTs, and that's the next level of NFTs, and it's a new application, but it's not really a new application. It's just sort of the same thing, right? Like take an asset which you can point to like a piece of media, and then just fill that in as the metadata field of your NFT. But I think what's interesting about ENS is that it kind of breaks that.
Yeah, technically it's the same form, right?
Yeah.
It's got the NFT has the same shape. Like ENS, I think, well, so the reason why the art stuff and the audio and the imagery came first and has a lot of attention is because it's just so much easier to understand.
Yeah.
Like ENS is only used for people that are already using crypto. And so the art and stuff is a foothold. It's a beachhead for people to kind of get into crypto and stuff. So I don't fault it for that.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. No hate, no bad vibes here. I think people should be creating more art and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of breaking the mental model, it's interesting to think about NFTs that represent kind of abstract concepts. So, in the kind of pre-show, we were discussing NFTs that represent, even more intangible things like kind of a future on, let's say you're a business and you have like a contract or something that you're going to get a certain amount of money in the future. Well, you can sort of package that up and say that's an NFT or something like that. And we can go into this later. So you can kind of make an NFT out of basically anything that you can point to. And it's even better if it's pointing to something that's on chain, because then it's entirely self-contained and you don't need to host it somewhere else or have a source of truth somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because like the word non-fungible is a little bit weird, and that's only in contrast to something in the digital world. And so like the default for the real world is that most everything is non-fungible. And so it's only notable when something is fungible, right?
Right.
And so we don't say that like our world is full of non-fungible stuff.
Yeah.
It's only that when we got computers and the internet, where it's this weird world where the digital world, most everything is fungible because it's just so cheap to copy that it flips that dynamic and basic calculus on its head. And the only reason why NFTs are notable is that for the first time, you can make some bits of data non-fungible or hard to copy ownership. Like you can still copy the bits, but you can retain records of ownership.
Right.
And that's the thing that's really hard to change. And so then people make the attribution error that because everything in the real world is non-fungible and non-fungible tokens refer to non-fungible digital things, like you can just make anything like an NFT. But the crux of that is that you need to be able to link the actual asset with the data that's on chain somehow. And this link can either be really strong because that asset is on chain itself, or there's like infrastructure and mechanisms to keep it around that you can link to. But there are other things where that link is more tenuous. And so that's the line that you need to be aware of when you're trying to figure out like, oh, what are these abstract things that NFTs can represent?
Right.
So that's the only thing I wanted to kind of clarify.
Yeah. Little aside here. Yeah. So one of my biggest regrets is that I had a friend who's very early into this space, and he was trying to convince me to work with him on some NFT stuff way back when, and I didn't get it at all when he pitched it to me, because his pitch at that time was that you can use NFTs to represent all kinds of things, and the examples of the kinds of things he gave were you can use NFTs to kind of gain access temporarily to a cafe's Wi-Fi, or you can use an NFT to, represent that you are authorized to stay at an Airbnb or some rental for some period of time. And like, it was kind of cool, but at the same time, it like just didn't connect with me. And I think part of the reason they didn't connect with me is kind of what you're saying, is that there is this online offline gap. And the more examples that you come up with of NFTs where it requires crossing this gap, the less it makes sense. Because it's technically difficult to maintain the syncing between the real world source of truth and the chain version of the truth. And two, it just like, if you're transacting and interacting with an object, the blockchain aspect of it is not really adding too much value. Like it just happens to be another convoluted type of database that you're interacting with. And so I think that the real stuff is that we're excited about, I think, are not necessarily things that are crossing this gap, but are actually kind of digital native objects.
Yeah, and like it's a convoluted database with a provenance. And so
Yeah.
people can decide to give value to that. Like why is gold valuable? Well, people seem to like shiny things. And so,
Yes.
so like we tend to think that, oh, okay, if we have a provenance for something, then we can assert its particular value. Yeah, I mean, I think one of those difficult gaps to cross is that we actually just don't have that many things that are digital assets until recently.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to really think or understand that concept. I mean, like, I guess DNS domains or like your account is at Facebook or Google is kind of the closest thing. But
Yeah.
even then, it doesn't feel like we fully own it because we know that the platforms that run this stuff for us, they can take it away at any time. So it doesn't really feel like we really own something, right?
Yeah.
And so with NFTs and its underlying cryptocurrency platform, nobody can force you to do something unless you were tricked. Yes, right?
Yeah.
So like now is the first time that we can have digital assets, and understanding that was something that helps bridge the gap. So then back to like the type of digital assets that we can see coming online. There's a bunch of them that are in the realm of DeFi, and DeFi is decentralized finance, where effectively people are making financial instruments on the blockchain. This is both exhilarating and terrifying. Because if you understand like the 2008 crash with the credit default swaps and whatnot, like this sort of stuff like puts that to shame. Like if you think that like credit default swaps were complicated, like DeFi, like you can compose and remix all sorts of stuff that are here. So one of the things that you can do with art NFTs, we keep coming back to it, but like in relation to DeFi, the NFTs can be fractionalized. So you can turn something that is non-fungible to be fungible again. Yeah. So it's basically like I guess you could call it like a Groupon for art NFTs, or like Groupon. Yeah. So like NFTs, they're really expensive. So if you wanted to own one, you either have to buy it outright, or you can pool your money together and buy it with other people and own a fractional part of it. And so, the DAO would buy the NFT, it would own it, but then it would issue a ERC20 token, which is fungible, as your claim to the fractional part of the non-fungible.
You know, this is funny because the very first corporation in the entire world, I believe, was the one of the East India corporations. Its charter was, we're going to go somewhere, or we're going to go to India, and we're going to conduct trade there, and we need to raise money. And so the way that they did it in the first time in the world was that they were like, well, how about everybody gives us money, and then we're going to give you stock. And then when we come back and have something of value, then you get a share of whatever value we've claimed. And so that was the very first kind of idea. And this kind of reminds me of that, where basically, you know, somebody can say like, hey, I think that this particular asset is going to be very, very valuable. And by asset, I mean like an NFT. So somebody, like, let's say, identifies an emerging artist or something, and they say, well, like, let's all pool our money together and buy their art, which maybe is currently expensive, but we think it's going to get even more valuable over time. And then everybody can reap the rewards of having purchased that asset. And so, yeah, I think that's really interesting. And so what we're talking about here is that an NFT is something where you can kind of compose it with these other blockchain concepts. So you can, you know, issue other types of tokens that represent ownership in this object, which is something that is actually quite cumbersome to do. There's no real equivalent in the current world, in the offline world, except for like stock certificates or something.
No, timeshares isn't that like?
Well, timeshares are a whole other. But yeah, yes, conceptually, yeah.
I guess conceptually, like I don't know if you actually get like ownership, but I guess like conceptually, it's somewhat similar. But
Yes, yeah. But the infrastructure for fractionalizing things is kind of, it either doesn't exist or you have to kind of draft up your own legal structure for that. But
because a lot of it is just so cumbersome to set up, and maybe with good reason. I don't know. We'll see, right? Because the internet really made some things that were traditionally hard easy, right? Like publishing is one, and distribution of like ideas and music content. Like traditionally was hard because you need to go through publishers, and at first people universally lauded it as a good thing, like let 1,000 voices bloom. But then like, well, we get the state of the world today where, well, it turns out that not everybody who has something to say has something worth to say. So like ideally you would have something to filter that out. But you know, we are suffering some ramifications of the system that we built. And so NFTs could be the same way, but I think there's still a lot of optimism in the beginning as we're starting out this thing. And so yeah, like for those of you interested in fractionalizing NFTs, it's at partybid.app, and there's a DAO that is involved in called the Party DAO. And so check that out for the fractionalization NFTs.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I think another interesting aspect that I've seen is that you can take loans out against NFTs, which is not too foreign of concept, because you can also take loans out against just any random, thing that you own. You can go and collateralize a loan with your house or with land or your car or something. But what's interesting is that you can now collateralize your loan against something that's entirely digital, which is something new. And I think that's a project that I thought was interesting, because when people are thinking about art NFTs, there's a lot of meme value, but like now it's quite possible that you can actually just consider that as a real asset against which you can like take funds and do something with, rather than just sort of collecting them and watching them appreciate or not appreciate. It becomes a real kind of valuable object the more things you can do with it. And I think taking a loan against something is yet another sort of notch in the belt for, this is a real thing with a real value.
Yeah, NFTfi.com is the project you're referring to for taking out a collateralized loan for NFTs, right? Yeah. I think we'll discuss it in the far future, but like individuals to companies will start owning NFTs, art or not, as a way to shore up their balance books, and they would be able to take out collateralized loans against these things. And not only that, there are things called flash loans in the world of DeFi, and that is a loan in which you borrow the money, use it, and pay it back all within the same transaction. And typically for loans, you would need some sort of like KYC or credit, like some way to verify that the person borrowing the money is going to be able to pay you back, right? And so like we do all this mechanism to ensure that people can pay us back plus interest, right? But on the blockchain, like Ethereum blockchain, it enables people to borrow money, use it for arbitrage, and pay it back all within the same transaction. And so that way you don't actually need to do all the mechanism of KYC or anything like that. Like you just do it all in the same transaction because you get your money back immediately plus interest, right? But we can do like a different episode on this, but it's mostly for arbitrage.
Oh, okay.
And so if it like you can do these kind of weird kinds of loans through, NFTs that are collateralized or any number of things. Like that's my point is that there's different forms of loans that crop up due to the underlying properties of blockchains that you can do. And so having NFTs collateralized or like doing flash loans, that sort of stuff is
Yeah. I get your point. Yeah. I mean, they play well with these things. Like you can, they are native to this whole ecosystem. And so you can use them in all kinds of places where you might not expect, like, flash loans or taking loans against them, which, you would think that this sort of NFTs, if you think about NFTs as art and DeFi as sort of money, you would think that these two things are not really going to, mix very much, but because they're all kind of running on the same infrastructure, you can actually compose them in this interesting ways.
Yeah. And so the next, like we have lots to say about DeFi, but maybe we should just kind of pick one of them. We have like the Uniswap, Aave, and
I mean, I think
so. I'll let you pick one of them to chat about, because like I picked the last two.
For sure. There's an interesting trend that I see where you can basically create an NFT that represents that you are a stakeholder, that you have skin in the game in some type of financial transaction. And that sort of increases your social value. And so to go concrete, there is a project that I like a lot called Aave. And what Aave is an NFT that kind of represents a little digital creature. But what's interesting is that it's an NFT, and that NFT controls a staking position in the Aave network. And so what it means is that if you have an Aave, it means that you are currently staking this Aave token, and that changes how your Aave looks, and so it kind of creates a meme. It creates a meme-ification of a financial position, because if you have a Aave, it means that you are part of the Aave staking pool or whatever. And so you can show it off. You can say, hey, like, look at my Aave, and people can look at that and be like, oh yeah, well, I see that you hold a position, you have this financial position. And so it kind of creates this like meme effect around finance.
I see. Wait. So to take a step back, like Aave, like you have to buy an Aave token first of all, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you use ETH and then you go on an exchange, whether it's on Coinbase or on Uniswap, to trade ETH for Aave. And so once you have Aave, you can stake it. And so staking means that you put it inside the contract and you earn interest on it. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then as a result of as a result of staking your Aave, you get an NFT back with a representation of a cute little like creature.
Yeah, it looks like a Tamagotchi. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like a Tamagotchi. And the more that you stake, I guess the more different it'll look.
Yeah. So Aave, they have like different attributes. So they have value based on how much you've staked, but they also have other characteristics like traits that you can kind of attach to the Aave and kind of boost them. And so it's like a game. Owning an Aave involves you purchasing an Aave token, staking it, and basically making a financial commitment to the Aave token, and then you get back this NFT that you can now show to other people and kind of basically show off your financial position.
And so I guess one thing that I would say about this is that when I came out of college, I thought financial stuff was really boring. I think because like all the jargon and like it's targeted towards a specific crowd, right?
Yeah.
And I think what we see with crypto is that it's kind of like a mashup between financial concepts and things that people find legible or like find inviting, for the lack of a better word.
Yes.
And so you might write off people like memeing on GameStop.
Yeah.
Like these people don't know what they're doing, but honestly, like I think crypto, like if you were to mash like popular culture with Wall Street, like this is exactly what you would get,
Yeah.
right? People are learning financial concepts through like these crypto metaphors
Mhm.
for the
Yeah.
and so that's why having an avocado gotcha makes a lot of sense for retail investors. And like
Yeah. So I mean, I think Aavegotchi is one instance. There are a few other projects that are basically making NFTs around other financial positions. Whether it doesn't necessarily have to be about staking, you can have an NFT that basically represents basically any other transaction that you're doing in DeFi. But the interesting thing that I think about, there are two aspects that I want to discuss here. One is that the NFT itself is the thing that owns the staking position. It's not the person. It's the person owns an NFT, and that NFT actually controls the tokens. And so
that makes it tradable, right? Is
yes,
that where you go?
yeah. So you can trade this, and you can say, okay, I have like a this many Aave staked here, and I have this cool Aavegotchi. But if I want to exit this position and give it to somebody else, somebody can buy my Aavegotchi, and then now they are in control of those staked tokens. You can think about it in different ways, but like the way I think about it is that you have this like object that controls like money basically, and I can like give you this object, and now you control that money. And so that's a very, very interesting aspect. And there are yet other projects where the interest that's accrued kind of changes the way that the NFT looks. So your representation of your creature looks better and better, I guess, cooler and cooler as it accrues more power, basically. And this is all powered by finance, I guess, decentralized finance.
Yeah, and so then I guess a good question to ask is like why have all this blockchain stuff? Like, couldn't you have done this on top? I'm playing devil's advocate here. Like,
Yeah.
couldn't you have like done this with the existing stuff? Like, why not just throw it on a database, or like why not use the existing I don't know, like NASDAQ markets for this sort of thing? Because you could argue that like a financial position is kind of like equity in a company. So like why have this?
Yeah, I mean, I have my answer, which is that the way that finance is happening is changing, and finance is becoming much more social. And so we talked about GameStop, and if you go to Wall Street Bets, which is a toxic place, and I don't want to associate it too strongly with what we're talking about, but
I only mention it in the sense that it's kind of a democratized finance.
Right.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree. But I mean, I think the core concept of Wall Street Bets is interesting, which is that you have all these people who are kind of playing together. It's kind of like a gaming community. They're kind of gamifying finance. And what you see a lot of the time is that somebody says, I just bought in at GME at this price, or I have, I've taken this financial position, YOLO, and they take a screenshot of their Robinhood app and like share it with people. And that's their kind of proof that they've done this thing. And like, I don't imagine there are too many people who are like faking these screenshots or anything, but it's just kind of an indirect way that they're trying to create social value around taking a financial position. And as finance becomes more social, I think that things like Aavegotchi or NFTs that are representations of a financial position allow you to do that much more directly, where rather than taking a screenshot of your Robinhood and saying, hey, I own all this stock, you actually just make that as a first class object that is then tradable and inherits all the properties of things that are on the blockchain, rather than having it be just a JPEG.
It's publicly inspectable. It's composable. It's tradable. It's Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think my answer would be more on the builder side of things. Because if you wanted to make it something like Aavegotchi, where you're mashing up Tamagotchis with like an interest like bank account, like
Yeah.
that would never, you could never greenlight that in the current financial system.
Mm.
But like with blockchain technology, it effectively lets ordinary developers like you and me make credit default swaps. And that's why I'm saying it's both exhilarating and terrifying.
Yeah.
And so it makes this like financial stuff like much more legible, because before like personal finance gurus could only say like, okay, like I would want to talk about like your 401ks and like how to save and personal finance in this way that appeals to this particular segment. Like, you know, if I don't know, like there was a woman that like talked about it in the terms that she understood, and she was able to get a community around her perspective. But like you could never get like gamer perspectives around communities, much less have people in control of that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the thing that's different here. You can get all sorts of not only different kinds of finance, but finance that appeals to very particular and different segments of the population in a way that speaks to them.
Yeah, I think so. I do see that there are some concerns. The concern I have is that these things are so composable that you can create like just a crazy tangled web of things. So one scenario that I can imagine is like, let's say you have a very, very valuable NFT, and then somebody fractionalizes that NFT, and then some fraction of these NFT is then owned by a DAO, which is controlled by, again, like some other, the membership of the DAO is gated by a different NFT. And so like how this just like how far do you go down the stack like before you can no longer reason about like how this financial system is going to work?
I don't think you're going to be able to like when people think like, oh, physicists really like did a number on the financial system when they invented this stuff. Like they have not seen this stuff because like members of DAOs can be other DAOs.
Yeah.
And then taking liquidity pool positions in Uniswap, which is a decentralized exchange. Like those things are NFTs. You could fractionalize them.
Right.
Like compose. And once you fractionalize them, you get a fungible token, which then you can put back into Uniswap itself.
Yeah.
As part of the, like a market in the exchange. Right. And so like it just goes, you could conceivably go on. And like, at what point would it make it more resilient or make it more brittle? Like how many of these things have their values based on the value of something else?
Right.
And so, like I don't know that anybody is doing that analysis today.
Right.
But I don't know, maybe there should be a watchdog of some sort, like a global dashboard for this sort of thing. But yeah,
it's going to be crazy. But now that we think about it, it's not any crazier than the financial system that we have. Like stocks go up and down based on the movements of all kinds of things that are deeply nested together. And so, is it any worse than what we have? I'm not sure.
I think it could get crazy.
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, and I see what you mean. It can get crazier because anybody can come and make NFTs of these things. And actually, this is sort of the key aspect of NFTs is that it's permissionless. And so you don't need to go to the creators of Aave and say, hey, I'm interested in making Aavegotchi. Like, can I do this? It currently just so happens that I think the people who are involved in the Aave project created Aavegotchi. But, increasingly in the future, you could have other people coming and building games or building NFTs or, gamification elements of finance without going to the original project owners and saying, hey, we're interested in doing this. Will you give us your blessing? People are just going to come and do this. If you can write the smart contract, you can make NFTs of anything. You can make DAOs of anything. And so it's completely permissionless in that sense.
Yeah, and I think we're going to skip the gaming part of it, but
Yeah.
as a quick aside, like not just like the Avogacci, the Avogacci data and the attributes by themselves don't do anything. It requires somebody to interpret like what they mean in the context and the world that you're going to give them. But the thing is, you don't need blessing, like you said, from Avogacci people creators themselves. Like you can reinterpret it however you want to, right? Like,
Hmm.
yeah, you can use Avogaccis as logins to your new service if you want, and you don't need permissions from them,
Right.
right? And so that's one really interesting aspect of it. And so if Avogacci creators go away and Avogaccis are NFTs that exist on chain, then you could conceivably just keep doing stuff with it.
Yeah. There are many things to go over there, but I think kind of gives you an idea, flavor for the fact that culture and finance are going to collide in these interesting ways.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for gaming, we're gonna skip that for the time being. We have lots to say about other things, and so we might like move that to an NFT part two,
Yeah.
but we'll just make sure to pull ourselves out of that rabbit hole and move on to another section that we see a lot of interest in NFTs.
Yeah. Yeah. So in general, NFTs are cultural artifacts. They derive their value from basically social properties, either their fact that they're scarce or that their provenance, that they are issued by a particular creator, and by purchasing an NFT or owning an NFT, you become part of that creator's community that they're building, the world that they're building. And so I think that's a really, really interesting aspect of NFTs, is the community aspect, as well as uh, the way that they allow creators to engage with their fans beyond what they're currently able to do. So currently creators are able to sell tickets to their shows, they might be able to sell merchandise, but it's sort of these one-off point in time transactions. But with NFTs, because you can kind of think of them as these long-term living objects, you can have this like continuous interaction or engagement with creators that you care about. And so that can provide financial benefits to the creators, as well as maintaining the sort of energy and sense of community among the supporters.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes when people ask like, oh, like what actually gives NFT their value? And like one thing I come back to is this example of the creator. Like the if the creator leverages NFTs as a way to engage their community and interact with their community, then they are the ones that imbue it with value because they're willing to honor it, right? Honor it with what? And so they can issue an NFT and honor the NFT with special access to new tracks that they're recording, new rewards. Yeah, so I think as an example, the best Kickstarters that I've seen are where the rewards are the residual side effects of having to do the work anyway rather than extra work. And so a good example is if you're drawing a comic book, the rewards would be the background pencil sketches that you were going to have to do anyway. You reward the super fans with, oh, okay, here's the sketch that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. It's kind of like a backstage pass, right?
Right.
Rather than like making t-shirts, which is a whole thing
Right.
in itself, right? And so the creator can use these NFTs to engage their fans and kind of suss out the super fans and use them to subsidize everybody else that wants to be exposed but aren't necessarily super fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the way that they can build community this way.
Yeah, definitely. And so it isn't too foreign of a concept, because it's analogous to things like Kickstarter, like you mentioned, as well as the kind of tiered reward systems for Patreon, where, if you are a Patreon member or contributor to, let's say, a YouTube channel, you might be able to give feedback on the outline of a video, or you can request a topic, or you can get an early release version of a long form content, which you might otherwise have to wait for months for the creator to finalize and edit and polish up. And so I think that those things kind of exist, but what's interesting about bringing them to the NFT world is that now that they live on chain, you can basically trade them. So fans can trade them with each other and say, okay, I have this NFT that gives particular access or interaction with this creator, but let's say that I want to sell it because maybe I'm not interested in that creator anymore, and I want to give it to somebody else who is. You can. Or another way to think about it is that, let's say that I'm a really early fan of a creator who makes it really big, and so I have access to an NFT which represents, I get to go to Backstage Pass for all their concerts or whatever. And let's say that creator really blows up and becomes huge. Well, that NFT could become very valuable. And so now that becomes a real asset, which I can trade and benefit. And basically I've benefited from identifying talent early and investing in them early. And now, because of the liquidity and tradability aspect of an NFT, I can get financial reward for that.
Yeah, and one of the big things is you could do this before, but the marketplace just was really local, or it just wasn't there at all. So like being an NFT, the market is global. So effectively, I could see people whose livelihoods are basically tastemakers, and those exist today, but like they can be tastemakers for, I don't know, artists, and in which the avenue that they do this is buying their NFTs. Because originally you had to work for a company that is doing publishing or something like that. Like you needed infrastructure to build this sort of stuff up. But like, as long as you can afford the NFTs, given that you've identified them early enough as a tastemaker, then you could like earn based on your taste identifying skills.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of buzzwords in the Web3 world, but like, I think people are excited about like the curator economy. So there was the creator economy, which was, is passe. They only coined the term in like 2019, but now we're moved on to the curator economy.
Well, yeah. So, but I mean, like, stupid sayings aside, it's probably going to be a thing. I mean, that thing already exists. People don't bat an eye on that. It's just, I think, a different way to do it. Yeah, and I think the NFTs allow people like artists and creators to segment their super fans, and so like you can provide more expensive NFTs that allow greater access to you, or like backstage passes, or like background sketches, that sort of stuff. And it allows creators to do tiered pricing to fill out the demand curve. And so I mean, in some ways, like nobody likes paying more for the same airplane seat, but airlines do it so that the people that can't pay don't have to, and the people that are willing to pay more are able to, or they're indifferent, so you can capture more of the buck as a result. And like, given that the internet has made digital creations less economically and financial viable, I think people are embracing it. But I think this is just a pendulum swing back and forth here. But I mean, the interesting thing here too is that it changes business models, because creators can earn residuals on every trade of their NFTs, because that residual can be built into and enforced by the contract.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't have to look at licensing or ask the platforms to enforce stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like the residual, which is the percentage, is it kickback or percentage you earn on every trade, basically. So
yeah. So in the example that I gave of the curator who identifies a creator early and then sells an NFT to the backstage pass, once it appreciates, it's possible because of the programmability of NFTs that the creator actually created that residual. And so let's say that it appreciates significantly, they could earn a small percentage of the appreciation amount to kind of fund their work even further. And so you can do all kinds of things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so as a concrete example, there's an artist called 3Lau, 3LAU, and you can check him out. Like, he sold 33 NFTs as part of his album release, and these NFTs are redeemable, and you can get sent a limited edition vinyl or like a more expensive one. Like, the top bidder can now collaborate with them to produce a brand new single. And so these are hallmarks of what we talked about earlier of things that cater to super fans, which then fill out the demand curve, have it subsidize everybody else. So it's a way for creator and culture economy to thrive under this model.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that this creator is doing this, and I think that they're pretty big. They're well known just outside of even just these NFTs, but they are.
Oh, really? I've never heard of them.
Yeah, but this is an example of what we've talked about in passing, but I do want to dwell on a little bit, is that in that example, it's really cool, but it's an example of skeuomorphism, where you take these digital things and you have them mimic their real world counterparts. And so in this case of 3Lau, the NFTs, they represent a limited edition vinyl. They represent being able to interact with them offline. And so this is sort of skeuomorphic in that these are things that you could do anyway, right? You didn't have to package it up as an NFT. But I think that increasingly the experiences and the access that the NFT will give you is access to the creator in a much more on-chain and digital native sense. So, you can imagine that if you are a creator, you can have these tiered NFTs like you mentioned, to fill out your demand curve, and you can have super fans buy like really cool juiced up NFTs that represent your album. And then now the people who own these NFTs can help vote on what tracks are going to be on your next album, or they can do a let's play or like the Twitch plays X kind of thing, where they can even guide or force you to take some interesting artistic direction, and then so they've kind of collaborated in the creation of your next album, and so these are all things that are less skeuomorphic and more kind of native to the ecosystem.
Yeah, I read something as part of this research for NFTs that David Bowie thought the internet was going to do that.
Yes.
For art. Did you see that?
Yes.
And I thought it was interesting in that, okay, he did foresee the stuff, but maybe he was still a little bit early on it. And so I think do you know if a lot of current artists do a lot of fan stuff? Because I know that it took some getting used to in certain media, and in that when you put a work out there, the internet mob may take it in directions you never expected it to.
Yeah.
And you just kind of have to like be zen about it and surf along it rather than trying to like hard pivot on. And so I got that sentiment from Alexis Ohanian when he was trying to advise people about the internet. I think like,
yeah,
where if you put out a poll on what to name your boat and they come with boating motivations,
yeah.
You just kind of ride with it, you know?
Right.
And then, so there's this back and forth where like even TV shows, like they do a lot of nods to super fans because the creators read these forums where the fans are talking, right?
Where they like try to ship two characters together romantically or have conspiracy theories or fan fiction and things like that. Yeah.
Right. And then they kind of like pick the stuff, they respond to it and they do callbacks to it on the show. And so there's this kind of feedback loop that's going on already. And so I think NFTs financialize it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the thing I want to point out is we talk about like, oh, okay, like we have the skeuomorphism in which like we're doing the things that we already can do because that's what we're familiar with. And only when we kind of done the stuff will we really figure out what this medium is about.
Yeah.
And as an analogy, like email came on first, like with the internet, because it was analogous to snail mail. And it took a long time before we figured out, oh, the internet is really good at social media. Social media could not have existed
Right.
before the internet. And so you're saying basically the same thing in which like the NFTs, like we're just making a lot of the stuff that we're already familiar with, but it'll take a while before like we get stuff that is native to the blockchain and Web3 before we really realize its potential.
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of that is what people miss in Clay Christensen's sense that like the new thing can be terrible at everything else. And everybody's pointing to all the things that it's terrible at. But as long as it's like 10 times better at that one thing.
Yeah, then it becomes a disruptive innovation.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. That one thing that matters, right?
Right.
And so I think so far the NFTs are really good at giving people the freedom to exit something that they don't care about, and they get to make the choice for that. And that's the ownership part.
Yeah.
And then it's freely tradable on markets that already exist. So you don't have to like go and build a whole new market because like people are already interacting in these communities already, right?
Yeah.
But like now we're putting in infrastructure for them to do it financially as well.
Yeah. And I think those two properties are definitely really interesting. And the other property that I get excited about is that NFTs basically allow you to permissionlessly remix them. So we talked about it a little bit with Aavegotchi and how they, you didn't have to go ask the Aave creators if you wanted to go create Aavegotchi or something like that. Same thing could happen with creators and their creator communities. People create fan fiction and fan art all the time. Well, what if you had fan NFTs, right? There are NFTs where you can have layers to them. So you have a base NFT and then you can kind of buff them the same way that you could buff an item in a video game, and you can attach another NFT to this NFT and make it so that it looks cooler if it's an art piece, or it basically just has some other cool properties. And so you can imagine that a creator can issue an NFT and then the community can get excited about that and make kind of modification layers on top of that NFT. And so now you have this community who is, like you said, participating in a feedback loop where it's not just top down. The creator is pushing content to the community. The community is now using this infrastructure to then interact with that content and push content back to the creator, who can then continue to riff. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I think this is definitely in the territory of like in the near future. Because right now, so I've been writing an NFT myself, and the spec you're referring to with the composability is ERC 998.
Yep.
And I haven't seen a lot of people use that, even though that thing is out. And definitely for the NFTs whose asset is entirely on chain, you could conceivably call it from a different contract, like a different NFT, and incorporate that image into your own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so not, as an aside, not all NFTs use JPEGs or PNGs as images. Like they can use SVGs, and SVGs are just markup that you can store on chain.
Yeah.
And so you can conceivably like pull in stuff, SVGs from other contracts. There's a whole rabbit hole of the subtleties and nuances that I won't go into here, but it's definitely possible. But I haven't seen a lot of move in that direction because I think people's heads are still reeling from the fact that NFTs exist at all.
Yeah, I think I've seen a few NFT projects that are still in the art space that are using ERC 998, where you have a base NFT, but then you can add some like kind of foil layer and make it like a shiny version of that NFT, or it's like some things like this. But yeah, it's still really early. And you know, going back to this skeuomorphism that we've been talking about, you know what I feel like where we are in the adoption curve or the maturity curve of NFT? Did you ever use AOL back in the day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So AOL, like before it just became a generic ISP, like it had its own little like walled garden world of the web where it had these like cute icons where your email was like a little, you know, mailbox icon, and like shopping was like a mall that you'd go to. It just felt like a little like town, basically. Like they modeled the internet as a little town because everybody knows what to do when they go, you know, to the shopping center or to your mailbox or whatever it is. And so it kind of feels like we're at that level of skeuomorphism for NFTs as well as other things as well in Web3, where we're mapping them to things that we're familiar with. And at some point, like the like native content is going to come, and then nobody's going to, you know, use these skeuomorphic crutches anymore. The same way that we're not, you know, going to the mall when we do online shopping. You just like go to you go to Amazon, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so Amazon isn't structured like a mall. Like you don't have aisles in Amazon.
Right.
Like it's like people understand that online shopping, you have a search and then you can filter and sort and search because that's what natively like online databases are good at, right?
Yeah.
Like you can do that. Like nobody structures it as aisles that you have to browse. That's when it was skeuomorphic, right?
Yeah. 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 So I think we're still there in that level of skeuomorphism where, I mean, I don't think people are unaware. I don't think we're sitting here with like our genius brain idea that like, oh, we're in the skeuomorphism world. Like the people who are building NFTs are probably aware like, hey, we're just doing this because this is what we can get a foothold on right now. But as the sort of more people kind of bash their heads at like, what can we do with this? And two, as you have more people on chain and more assets on chain with which to interact, it becomes this sort of network effect where right now there are only, you know, these level 1 NFTs that represent, you know, skeuomorphic things. But then as those things exist and people own them, then you can start building like level 2 layers on top of that, where you can attach things with them, you can compose things with them, you can fractionalize them. And then from there, we enter the Wild West where now everything is connected to everything and everything is composed with everything. So I think it'll take a while. It requires some amount of adoption of the sort of basic stuff before you can get to the really crazy stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to, do you have other things to say about like interesting properties for NFTs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that we touched on a little bit is that they are content agnostic. Basically, you can point them to images, but yeah, like you mentioned, you can point them to SVGs. You can have them represent basically, you know, any other thing. And Yeah.
As an aside on the SVG, like the interesting about the SVGs for NFTs is that these SVGs don't have to be static. They can change based on the data that is on chain, and not just data on the NFT contract itself, but any data that's on chain. So you could conceivably have an NFT that is green when the price of Ethereum is up and red when the price of Ethereum is down, because we already have automatic market makers and these decentralized exchanges on chain that track the price of Ethereum. So you can have these SVGs that are almost like those IoT devices that are blue when it's raining or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. And you could have wallets that are on your watch and use them as watch faces. And so those are things that are entirely possible. These NFTs that read data off
Yeah, that's
that on chain.
Yeah, you could have, like, if you own one of those, like, Bored Ape Yacht Club NFTs, you could have, like, the monkey, like, be sad when ETH is down or something like that. Yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of possibilities there. And it doesn't necessarily, like you said, it's content agnostic. It doesn't actually have to return SVGs. You could conceivably return a web page with a front end written on it. The thing is, it's just really expensive to do right now, right? But if and when the gas prices are a lot cheaper, you could conceivably have an entire simple front end, like written on chain, and get returned so that there is a front end app that lives on chain and will forever be. Keep in mind that these apps have to be really simple because like you can't store that much stuff on chain.
Now there's a lot more pressure, I feel, to have the assets live on chain, or at least live on IPFS, which we talked about in our last episode. So I think there is interest in, like, making NFTs less fragile in that sense, where, you know, if the CDN server goes down, like, your NFT is not useless. But one thing that is interesting is if you either have a very simple front end on chain, or you point to an IPFS address, which represents a front end, you could have that front end again be a Web3 enabled web page that allows you to interact with the NFT itself. And so you have an NFT that is exposing an interface for you to interact with it. And so in that sense, it's a kind of object which becomes, you know, it has a physical representation by which you can, like, interact with it. And so it's kind of interesting. It's like a small talk, like we talked a lot in our previous podcasts about, like, making something representable, object representable. And so, yeah, maybe you can have something like that for blockchain objects.
Yeah, it carries its own view with it, effectively.
Yes.
And so right now, people rely on Etherscan, which is a blockchain explorer for Ethereum, for, like, a really crude, like, API interface for it. But you could conceivably just have a really simple version of that on chain. Like, you can click, maybe, like, just like, you almost have to think of it as a watch face.
Yeah.
That you can have. It's not like a full-fledged app that you would have on your desktop.
Yeah. I think, like, NFTs, they can react to the things on the chain. They're programmable. You can have them, you know, pay out money when they're traded back to the original creator. You can have them be stealable. There are plenty of NFTs currently in the art world that you can steal them if you pay more for them than the previous owner. So you can have, like, basically arbitrary logic, as long as, you know, it's kind of, if you get the game mechanics right, then it kind of creates something interesting about them.
Yeah, there's all sorts of, there's other things. Like, the common one I talk about is one where the NFT contract is a really simple generative art, and people can claim these pieces of art that get generated
Yeah.
And if they can sell it on the open market for a higher price, great. But if they can't and they don't like it, they can actually sell it back to the contract, and that NFT gets burned forever. And so the NFT that you claim and buy from that contract get more and more expensive the more NFTs get minted. So it's basically on a price curve.
Yeah.
And so effectively, this whole system is trying to find an optimum price for the kinds of art that it generates. So it's kind of like a simple smart contract / human symbiosis to do price discovery on this kind of art.
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah. So
The project is called Neologic.
Neologic. Okay, cool. We'll have the links to that in the notes.
Neolastics. Yes, good thing for sure.
Yeah. Actually,
Neolastics.
I saw something also in the similar idea of generative art, where so if you recall the episode with DALL-E. DALL-E is a generative AI model that takes in a text description and then outputs an image. And I forget the name of it. I'll put it in the show notes. But there is a collective of NFT artists that basically have taken a version of DALL-E that takes in this text and outputs art. And they have a DAO that votes on what the input to the model is that outputs the art. And so you basically have a collective of people that is trying to steer this machine learning model to create interesting art, which then gets minted as NFTs and gets sold. And so it's kind of,
they get the collective profits.
Yeah, you get the collective profits, or rather the profits go back into the DAO, which then they reinvest to train their next model. In this case, the interesting thing is the NFT doesn't actually represent the image. It actually it represents the phrase that's the input to the model. The model has a sort of latent space, and points in that space represent different pieces of art, and there are infinitely many of them. But basically what you're doing is you're selling off real estate in their latent space of this machine learning.
Yeah. Definitely. I was saying that one of the things people have qualms about is storing images on chain. But if you can just store the latent space on chain and have the model be standardized on IPFS or something like that, then you could totally do this sort of thing, right? And I think that probably is the case because people release like models that then everybody glom onto, like DALL-E, Clip or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's totally doable.
Yeah. So those are they're like big models like that, but yeah, I think you can train arbitrary, like you can train other models as well that generate more specific art styles or things like that, and then you can auction off the latent space of those things. And so yeah, it's an interesting world.
Right, but if you have a standard one that everybody agrees that this is where the stuff, it's kind of like starting a new social network, right? Nobody wants to be in the latent space that isn't worth anything. Everybody wants to be in this. Unless
you create a mute latent space that is interesting, and then you, as a creator or trainer of that model, you can get residuals from the NFTs that are sold of that latent space. And so it incentivizes people to create like new and interesting latent spaces.
Yeah. I mean, that's all open yield right now until we find the one model that dominates. Right. And so then, like, I guess we've gone through a lot of different examples, and we've talked about like the properties that make this stuff unique and kind of where we're at right now, where we haven't really fully taken advantage of these properties. Like, what do you think are the second and third order effects once this stuff is really pervasive?
Yeah, I mean, I have sort of scattered my thoughts as we were going, but I think that the main thing that the second and third order effects are that if you think about memes right now, where like memes sort of take a life of their own, and what I mean by memes are like image memes on Reddit and things like that. They take a life of their own because anybody can kind of take edit an image, remix an image, and post it on Reddit, and people laugh or whatever. And the same thing is going to happen now with NFTs, where NFTs are an object which has social value because everybody can view it and look at it and see its provenance. And then if you then add this remixable layer, now people are riffing off of things. So you can imagine that, instead of posting your Wall Street bets like loss and say I lost all my money making like bad options bets on GME and then getting Reddit votes, you can basically take your losing financial position and memorialize it as an NFT and then sell it and then make your money back potentially. And so these are the kinds of things that are possible. Like you can basically create assets out of anything. And
as long as other people agree to buy it, that you have something going.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So basically what underpins all these NFTs is the social aspect. You need a community, you need eyeballs that are looking at this and can perceive its value or can like convince each other of its value.
Yeah. At least for kind of the cultural NFTs, like the art and the meme type of NFTs.
Yes.
There are, as the point of our whole show is that there are other types of NFTs. And so, but like going back to like the second and third order effects, like I think that's probably definitely true. Like we see this sort of thing already with the TikToks and against the reels and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's not a far stretch to say that this sort of thing will happen with crypto, because there are a lot of people with their ear to the ground on the pulse of culture.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not one of them. I don't know about you. But...
Yeah, not me either. You can think about it as financialization of memes, or you can think about it as the meme-ification of finance. Either way, you're basically creating NFTs have the capability of creating cultural artifacts around anything. And right now we think of cultural artifacts in terms of art and songs and things like this. But you can now create cultural artifacts around literally financial losses, financial wins, access to creators, access to celebrities, whatever it is. And so this is what makes NFTs very, very interesting.
Yeah, I used to think that it was really weird that finance could take a position on, say, like, what is the weather and trade that.
Yeah.
It's about to get even weirder with all this like meme stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I'm excited about is just memes that transcend images and art and into just abstract memes of anything.
I bet you there'll be meme museums in the future, and not just physical ones, but digital ones. Honestly, would like like kids would have to study these memes. Honestly,
yeah. So there's an interesting project which I won't go too deep into, but basically somebody's creating a NFTs out of tweets, and the most valuable NFT is, of course, the very first tweet by Jack Dorsey, just setting up my Twitter. And these NFTs can only be minted by the people who tweeted it. And so it was minted by Jack, and it was most recently sold for $2.9 million or 1,600 ETH. And so, yeah, this is, again, just setting up my Twitter, that tweet is a cultural artifact. Like, that is the beginning of something that has such significance in the world. And like wouldn't you want to commemorate that as an NFT and put that in a museum of internet history or whatever? Like, it makes total sense.
Yeah, I mean the Library of Congress is already archiving tweets, and so in that sense, it's be memorialized. But like gives people a way to make it a transaction, I guess,
Yeah.
to trade it around and own it, because that's one of the main properties that we identified, that it piggybacks off of all the infrastructure that you could use this for otherwise. Yeah, I mean, as long as people recognize that NFT contract is the NFT contract for tweets, then it will retain its value.
Yeah.
As soon as somebody like as long as soon as the Schelling point for the official NFT contract shifts somewhere else, then that NFT will lose value. And so it's kind of like a floating value concept that I think is a little bit hard for, and that's the provenance aspect. And so that's, I think, the objections that we were going to skip, that like people that object to it offer up as an objection all the time. Like, what prevents me from just setting up a new contract that mints tweets? Well, you don't have the provenance. Like people acknowledge it as a cultural artifact.
Yeah.
And so the Schelling point rests with that contract, not yours.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of my little spiel. What do you think are some of the effects that you're excited about?
Yeah, for me, the second and third order effects, kind of like when this NFT stuff is pervasive, like what sort of stuff are we going to see? I was thinking my pet NFT in the future is actually invoices.
You really took it, like you were like, art is too interesting. Let's go to invoices.
Let's go to invoices. No, I mean, like, I think, like, people wax poetic about like supply chain, this and that, but I think companies and organizations will have a portfolio of digital assets on their books. And so they can use this portfolio of digital assets as part of their financial leverage in taking out loans or taking a financial position strategically. And so, for example, right now, what people do today is something called invoice refactoring. If I have an invoice in which I owe my vendor money,
Mhm.
I can sell that to somebody that wants to gather it. And so because I need capital today,
Yeah.
and I don't want to have to be able to pay it back over time, and somebody else that can take the time, they'll pay it back over time and give me the money.
Yeah, it's a way for businesses to basically not take out loans, but rather get money today based on their future cash flows.
Right. And so that's a much better way of putting it. And so companies could have all these sort of digital assets that earn them money, whether through staking or because, there's a certain amount of money locked up that's being dripped out over time, or, like invoices that technically don't have any money in them, but it's seen as an IOU from the other people. And of course, like, some people would say, well, if you need the government and the courts to enforce this, like, what's the point? But I would say that for invoices, it's the fact that you can trade them immediately, like, would be a reason to get them on chain.
Yeah, yeah.
Or even compose them together to package it up like a credit default swap.
Yeah, I guess so. I think it makes sense. We were talking in the DAO episode about, how are two DAOs going to interact, and if you think about the two blockchain native organizations, if they're going to sign a contract, it's probably going to be a smart contract that's on the blockchain. Or they might own assets, like you mentioned, staking, yield farming, whatever other assets. Those are also going to be native and on-chain. And so now they can package up those contracts and sell them as an NFT or build derivative instruments on top of that NFT that represents whatever asset that they hold. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the sort of thing that I can see happening when this stuff is all pervasive. So that would be my like pet vision into the future, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and it includes things. It could be collectibles, it could be art, but it could be something more boring like invoices,
Yeah.
or other like financial positions, like the Uniswap liquidity pool or something like that. It doesn't really matter. Like there would just be a way to sell them, trade them, a way to value them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I do like the direction that you've taken this, in that I I projected out one step beyond where we are right now, right? Like, memes as art, memes as anything. But I think that as this becomes more and more mature, actually a lot of the value of NFTs and blockchain is going to be other more boring seeming assets that actually just have inherent value rather than cultural value. Of course, I think the cultural value stuff is going to be huge, and we haven't seen the peak of that yet. But I think that what's interesting about this invoice example, or holding the baskets of goods and then packaging that up as an NFT and things like that, is that we're going to get to the point sometime in the future, I don't know when, but we're going to get to the point where the value of the things on the chain, or at least online, is going to dominate the value of things that are happening off chain. We're not there yet, but if the crypto maximalists are right, that point may come, and at that point, you're going to see a lot of things that can be packaged up as NFTs, as all kinds of other instruments.
Wait, what do you mean that the value online is going to dominate?
It's going to exceed the value of things offline. So right now, when we think about the balance sheets of corporations, these are things that are fiat currencies. They are stock or other off-chain assets. But as things go along, the balance sheets of organizations is going to be increasingly on-chain, and then at that point, you can apply things like NFTs or other types of smart contracts, and then package them up and then start interacting with them in a much more interesting and programmable way.
Yeah, I think the part that I'm missing in my head is exactly how do we get from here to there, and so that part we don't necessarily have to get into, because like we'd just be taking stabs in the dark. But I think the key thing to remember there is what I said before, that it would have to be something where the business or the company or the organization was able to do that one thing that really mattered 10x better than they were able to do before, even though all this other stuff just kind of sucked, right?
Yeah.
And so for specific types of businesses with, like taking out loans takes a long time, or doing remittances across international borders, it takes a long time. And so I can see like those are the types of things that would be a foothold for this, like increasing the amount of digital assets to make space to take place.
Yeah.
Or like you want to lower the cost of interoperability because it makes sense to do so for players in the space. And so one thing might be that like equity might be one, like people that invest every year in startups or companies and whatnot, they get to a point where, because the check sizes are much smaller today than they used to be, it's really hard to kind of keep track of all that stuff. And right now it's just either on spreadsheets or on like Carta, or or like the equity management platforms. So just like you said that it was permissionless before, it's just that as long as you follow these standards for the NFT, then you inherit all these properties for these assets that you digitize on chain. And so you don't have to build a marketplace for this stuff. You don't have to build like the tradability,
Yeah.
interoperability, the composability of these assets. And then like other people can build on top of it, because like,
Right.
as long as that asset increases their value when other people use it, that's when the benefit comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like when CryptoPunks have derivative projects that then cement its cultural significance,
Yeah.
like that's an advantage of NFTs, right? When like invoices can be packaged up and tradable around so that companies can take out loans or flash loans or collateralize them,
Mm-hmm.
then, that is something that enhances its value, because then anybody can interoperate
Right.
without the normal costs of doing business.
Yeah.
So I think that's like kind of the 10x thing that this thing needs to be better at, whereas it could just be really sucky for everything else that can gradually improve over time.
Yeah. I think, one thing that really calls out to me, another instance of that 10x application, is things like equity. If you own startup equity that is not in a public company and you want liquidity, let's say you're an engineer at a startup company and a significant amount of your compensation is through equity, but you need to go buy a house, the bank is not going to value your startup equity at anything.
Yeah.
But so the solution to that is to find private marketplaces, and there are plenty of those that exist, where you can't quite sell the equity itself, but you can basically create derivative contracts where then when it does go public, you transfer the shares over to the buyer. And so but it's very cumbersome. And again, you're interacting with these smaller marketplaces where there is maybe less liquidity available, fewer buyers available compared to the public markets. And the people who run these marketplaces, the companies that run these marketplaces, of course, take their cut. And so it's at the end of the day, you're basically taking a huge cut, a huge discount to be able to sell your equity now in return for cash. And I think that the things like NFTs and blockchain can really help with that.
Yeah, it should lower the costs, at least on first glance. Obviously, there's a lot of different forces that are at play, because usually startups don't want like a whole bunch of nobodies on their cap table.
Yeah.
But so I'm curious as to how it'll actually play out. But yeah, I mean, like I think people that are dealing with these financial assets, like just these boring assets, will find a way to leverage these properties that NFT give us. And when you compose them, it could yield different kinds of things that you can do.
Yeah.
That it's just, it won't exist. Like, so I mentioned flash loans earlier in this episode. Like flash loans are something that's really native to the blockchain. Like they just don't exist outside of that, because it's the technology that enables it. And so I suspect that we'll see more of those things. Actually, come to think of it, there was this guy that do an experiment that are selling NFTs of his own time, or like holders of the NFTs get to vote on what they should do next, like which jobs they should apply to or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I guess the reason why I wanted to bring that up was we often thought of NFTs as companies or organizations holding these assets, but you could scale that up or down, I guess, down to the individual, where you can tokenize things that you normally wouldn't, and you would have a ready-made marketplace to trade that already. And so those tokens would have value simply because you would honor them, and people are buying it based on the fact that you would honor it. And I guess if you don't, what's the repercussion? I guess they know your name, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, like, instead of a credit score, transactions on the blockchain are denominated in your own personal token or your own personal currency. And then it's in your interest to not tank the value of your own personal currency.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was originally going to think that, like, the provenance of your ENS domain or your wallet. Like you have a history of, I don't know, doing the right thing over time. And so that's why you hold on to it. Yeah. And then what about at the scale of like nation states? How would they use NFTs? The only thing that comes to mind, the only thing that comes to mind are maybe something like like carbon credits or something. I don't know how that's currently tracked. It's probably a centralized database somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably centralized, or I think there are some like organizations and collectives, but there are more than one of those actually, and so there's no single source of truth. Yeah, you can imagine NFTs that represent that. I saw another riff on NFTs. It's just like another ERC thing, like called like semi-fungible tokens, where the things that it represents are not like actually unique assets, but they are instances of a class of asset. And so I think like you could use that to represent like tons of carbon or something and trade those around.
I see.
So yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah, I don't know about nation states, but certainly at local levels, you can imagine that NFTs are an interesting way to engage your citizenry in financing some type of projects. So let's say that you want to have a renovated, you know, a downtown square or something. And so a lot of times cities issue bonds and things like that in order to raise money. And so you
Right,
you could sort of raise money through like NFTs of something.
right. And so you could already do that with bonds. So why throw it on chain? Is it just because the market's bigger and there's more liquidity? I mean, that might be a good reason.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be a good reason. Again, like the key is, like you mentioned, that you don't want to get forced into a marketplace where there isn't enough liquidity, or you have to take on terms, unfavorable terms, because you need liquidity right now. And so, yeah, if you're able to throw it up onto a standardized infrastructure, that's where your NFT is discoverable by anybody rather than restricted to your jurisdiction, then you might be able to find more buyers and have more favorable terms.
You know, that makes me think analogously with the internet, that the first movers on the internet were able to capture the distributive properties of the internet. They found it really easy to get things to spread, but as more and more things got online, like it was just harder and harder, say in the late 2010s, like 2018 compared to the early 2000s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe the mid 2000s. And so then it ends up that these aggregators were the ones that accrued a lot of value because they controlled discoverability. And so I wonder if it's the similar thing, that right now, if you put something on NFTs, you'll get a lot of liquidity, but as everyone gets on, then maybe we have that discoverability problem once again. So unless it's built in chain, then that might be somewhere where value accrues and somebody's going to make a pretty penny doing discoverability there.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's one of the things that, I guess, if we're talking about the future and people talking about decentralization and, you know, like ownership, that sort of stuff, like they need to figure out where the part of the value chain is hard to do. And so then they do it and make it a public good.
Yeah.
Otherwise, a private company is going to wedge itself in there and make itself indispensable and hence accrue value there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And yeah, one of the risks of all of these things is that currently with NFTs, there are maybe a few hundred or a few dozen really notable ones, like in terms of the trading volume as well as the kind of the value, like trading value. There are at most a dozen that you can point to. And so there's a lot of eyeballs and a lot of interest in a few big whale NFTs. But as we start to make NFTs of everything, the discoverability aspect is going to be key, because now rather than just a few apes being traded, and that everybody knows and recognizes, you're going to see everything being traded all the time. And now you need either like verticals that index like a particular type of NFT, like an invoice NFT aggregator, or something like Etherscan that's limited to a certain type of NFT. And so that way you can limit your focus to a particular type of thing and discover things in that space, rather than looking at all NFTs being traded, because that then in the future that's going to become meaningless, because they're going to be art NFTs, they're going to be music NFTs, they're going to be invoice NFTs. Yeah, so we've basically covered a lot of ground, all the way taking NFTs from flashy art projects to representing financial transactions and more mundane things. And I think that when we get there, that future is going to be interesting, because it means that a lot of things that we take for granted today are going to be moved on chain, and that's when the real network effects and the real composability is going to come into play. So I think that's going to be a very interesting future. So overall, I'm excited about NFTs beyond art. I think that we are currently doing a lot of projection and extrapolation, and I'm curious to see the concrete projects come out, maybe this year, maybe in the next couple of years. But I think there are the seeds being planted right now for using NFTs to represent things beyond just JPEGs, as the detractors sometimes say.
It's hard to predict. I mean, like, I was working in crypto like 4 or 5 years ago. When I looked at it then, I'm like, NFT's a little too early, like maybe 6 or 7 years from now. And it was half that time. And so it's just really hard to tell with this sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, like, we covered a lot of ground, but it's by no means everything. There's still a whole bunch of things that we decided to cut out because we're already well beyond our usual time for the podcast. And so, like I said, for the third time now, like, exhilarated and terrified, because it's just, I think this world in which NFTs are coming in and out will be largely illegible for people.
Yeah.
And you can only kind of really get a local view, and somebody will try to aggregate it all so that you get a more global view, so you can find something optimal and personalized to yourself. And we'll see if the decentralized CryptoPunk, like cypherpunk ethos will remain when this sort of stuff matures, and kind of keep it more as a public good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. But overall, the part that I'm excited about is that this is yet another building block for application developers and builders to make things with like a financial component to it.
Yeah. Yes. So actually, we usually have our usual call to action to, like, share, and to subscribe for this podcast. But I actually am going to do something different for this podcast. I'm going to mint a screenshot of this video as an NFT. Whoa. And please purchase this, so that one day when we are a huge podcast as big as Joe Rogan Experience, you're going to own one of the limited edition rare NFTs, and you'll gain credibility as a curator and identification of talent.
Man, I should have shaved for this. But that's okay. We're matching. So you have a beard, I have a beard.
Yeah.
All right. Is our heads the same size?
Maybe.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so that's good. That's going to be the NFT. I'm going to mint it, and it will be also pointed to by a .eth address, and so you can buy that.
Awesome.
So yeah, I mean that's it for this week.
Yeah, and so I'm excited to the moon, and to I mean I think there's a lot of possibilities here, so I'm pretty optimistic. Terrified, but also optimistic.
Very cool. Yes, so come back next week for a new episode of the Technium where we discuss ideas from the edge of technology. Until then, see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.